Welcome to Common Off the Shelf, a podcast for the modern Contra and preppers. We discuss items, books, and topics from a common man's perspective, and our opinions are our own. Do not take any of these as hard facts, only as our interpretation and understanding in a flawed world of amazing products, price gouging, and cheap crap. Your results may vary, and your needs may differ depending on where you live and what you know. So don't take this as a blanket endorsement for all people in every situation. Just like camouflage, your abilities and needs will vary. This is a conversation about hypotheticals and fiction with these items, and never is an endorsement of the owner, author, or any actions. Lastly, we're just common men and not experts in the fields. If we get it wrong, great, tell us. If there is something better, let us know. I can't believe I had to say this, and some of you window lickers made this necessary. Hello, all you wonderful pro-contra Guerrilla Guide to the Baofeng reading individuals. I'm going to be discussing Guerrilla's Guide to the Baofeng again. Sorry we haven't gotten to this earlier. I've been busy and haven't really been organized well enough, which I need to fix. But to remind all you guys, we got to page 14 in the fold-over version, which was I ended with a word about cover for action. And we're going to go on to the ultra-high frequency section. Now, I'm going to kind of skim through some of this because a lot of this is not... This is something you need to look in the book and get a better acquainted to when you're deciding your frequencies, but I do want to discuss this. He's got great points there. So, page 15, ultra-high frequency, 400 to 470 megahertz is the ultra-high frequency UHF range of the Baofeng radio. UHF perform well in urban environments. In rural environments, UHF experiences higher signal loss in dense vegetation. It also has a tendency to penetrate buildings rather than reflect and refract signals off of them, discussed further in operating techniques section. That said, for those reasons, UHF can be very effective at mitigating interception when used at the tactical level. An enemy with signals intelligence, SIGINT interception, and exploitation equipment have a more difficult time first intercepting, then gaining a line of bearing, LOB, on a lower power UHF signal in dense vegetation. But that said, a tactical group must also understand that their physical range in terms of distance between teams must also be shorter and often less than 1,000 meters when also using low power. UHF is broken down into the following services: Family Radio Service, FRS, General Mobile Radio Service, GMRS, UHF Business Bands, 70 centimeters amateur band. Family Radio Service, FRS, and General Mobile Radio Service, GMRS, operate within the same frequency space. These are frequencies that common two-way radios found in sporting goods stores use. The former does not require a license but has a lower output, 2 watts. GMRS requires a license that covers a group, allowing repeater use and up to 50 watts of power output. The frequency range for FRS and GMRS, and he goes down the list. There are 22 frequencies that are channelized, just like CB. I'm sure he'll say something about that in here later. Because FRS GMRS is channelized with known published data, it should be used with the same consideration to ComSec as MERS. Like MERS, however, it provides a solid option for simple sustainment level capability with minimal training. UHF Business Band is the counterpart to the VHF version. The frequencies are, and he lists them. You can find them online too. Our church was working on getting radios together, everything else, and we are going to be using a repeater system that everybody's getting a GMRS license for, and they have to ask for the use of the repeater. Simple email, you're not paying anything, but they want it open for access. We've also discussed this book in pretty good detail. And I'm probably going to modify how I train and how I do stuff with this. But this part of the book is something that you take to somebody and you say, hey, you want radio information? Here's the start. This is where you should look. There is more into this book, and I know the contras and preppers that are listening to this understand the necessity for it. Most common people don't. One of the pushbacks I got was, well, I'm not here to learn military stuff. And I'm like, I understand that, but this is all the same issues they had up there. Most people got with it. I think one guy was kind of like, meh, I don't want to learn this, and left out. And to be fair, radios are a niche topic. That's why I'm reading this book for you. So continuing on page 17, 70 centimeter amateur radio, like its 2 meter VHF counterpart, is in reference to one full wavelength of a UHF signal in that portion of the band. Its frequency range is 420 to 470 megahertz and is incredibly popular in most of the more densely populated areas of the US and the world. (220 to 250 megahertz). 220 to 250 megahertz, also known as the 1.25 meter band, when reference the radio amateur radio portion. 220 to 250 megahertz, also known as the 1.25 meter band, when referencing the amateur radio portion. 220 to 225 megahertz is featured on certain models of Baofeng radios called tri-band. The frequencies themselves are situated in the high end of the VH band, getting close to the beginning of the UHF range. It offers excellent performance in terms of range and clarity in woodland environments, superior to UHF, but not quite as well as the lower VHF band. This capability is important to note, however, due to the fact that few radios operate in this particular frequency range because there is a shortage of equipment. Little attention is paid to this portion of the spectrum. For this reason alone, it can mitigate both the likelihood of interception as well as exploitation. I will emphasize, however, that while it offers a level of security through obscurity, this should never mean basic practices of ComSec should be overlooked. I have radios that run on the 1.25 meters band, being a ham dude, and it is far less popular for that reason alone. So you don't usually go out and find a whole bunch of people chit-chatting on it, and it's also a nice alternative to go on there. That said, anyone who's playing with a spectrum analyzer, like a tiny SA Ultra that brush reader sells, just about any device out there can see you operating there, and it's unusual. So while you obfuscate from Bubba or Antifa, you obfuscate from somebody who actually knows what the hell they're doing. So keep that in mind. And I think he makes a good point in here, like, hey, pay attention to your ComSec, which is basically what he's referencing. So, summary. The Baofeng radio offers a vast amount of versatility in an inexpensive package, enabling much capability in the hands of small groups with the skill to utilize it in the proper way. This manual seeks to identify how to use the radio in the field with minimal infrastructure, creating a competent communication plan, communication techniques, a guide on improvised antennas, and how to implement digital communications and encryption for the maximum communication security capable. This is not and should not be considered a book on ham radio. It is the application of communications for guerrilla operations. And I want to emphasize this a lot. I know a bunch of you guys are ham dudes, and we've recently seen one ham radio operator saying he's going to stack up on buildings, and he got thoroughly demolished, and subsequently, I think he shut his account down, but the reality is he also apologized. But that mentality goes on for a lot of reasons. And I'm going to quote historian. If you go to his class, he'll probably tell you about this. In World War II, we weren't allowed to communicate on ham radio bands. That was for security reasons. They didn't want German operators transmitting information, etc. And it was almost banned completely in the United States. And I know that was well beyond most of our lives, but that memory in the structure of the society still sits. And I can't remember who was talking about it recently, but I heard a great conversation about how your structure inside of something, say the Army, the Air Force, etc., has a memory in its own on how its basic buildup of cultural and traditions make people think. Actually, I can tell you that came from How to Eat Soup with a Fork, a good book on more of an esoteric level looking at guerrilla warfare and tactical stuff with that. His point is not untrue that we ham radio operators want to self-regulate so they are not regulated by the government. And what happens is as time has passed and we've moved away from that point where that was a major concern and it was probably going to get shut down, we have a different form of people coming out. And those different people are just like today's FUDs in the gun industry who are like, we don't need machine guns, assault weapons, blah, blah, blah. The reality is we used to have machine guns. You could go buy, pick them up, and we could go into a whole dialogue on that some other time. And that's more of a political side structure of a comment. But a lot of these people are thinking back to bygone eras where they had restrictions, and they're not thinking, I guess, more past the one-dimensional scenario of if A, then B. And they're not thinking, well, what about C, etc. So while we give them grief, and they should be getting 100% grief, and I'm not telling you not to go beat them up online, the reality is it comes from a community structure of trying to control bad habits from bad actors. And the problem has come about is instead of controlling nuisance people who are causing issues, they're now trying to control everybody. So that's a major issue. So let's continue on. I'm on page 19, function and field programming. He has a picture, an image of the Baofeng, basic bitch Baofeng. And it says basic controls. UV 5R's layout is simple, an on-off knob to control the volume, a keypad, a push-to-talk, and a couple other buttons with unique functions on the side. Every aspect of the radio is controllable via the buttons and the embedded menus, which is highly important for us because that means you can do it in the field. Because every aspect of the radio is controllable and configurable, absent software, it is very simple to troubleshoot in the field. Once the operator becomes experienced with the basic controls, each button has a maximum of only 2 functions, making it simple for corrective action. That's very important. I love Yaesu. Yaesu makes their buttons extremely deep and complicated. They want less buttons and more functions, and it becomes a nuisance. Frequency and memory modes. Right after unboxing, first control to pay attention to is the VFO/MR button, located just below the screen. VFO stands for Variable Frequency Oscillator, and is a throwback term to the old days of radio when everything was crystal controlled. A crystal oscillated at a certain frequency, and that was the one the radio was operating on. VFO simply is another term for frequency mode. And the MR, also known as memory or channel mode, is the list of frequencies programmed into the radio memory bank. When in frequency mode, you can directly enter the frequency you want to operate on. In channel mode, you select which channel you've pre-programmed into the memory. When the UV 5R is in channel mode, there will be a small number on the far right on the display. These are programmed channels based on the position on the list. When the frequency mode, those numbers are not present. However, if the radio is using a narrowband frequency, it will have 2 very small numbers just to the right of the large digits representing the frequency. On that note, often newer folks to the radio confuse the term channel and frequency. Know that these are not interchangeable. One is a specific operating frequency. The other is a frequency entered in a memory or a frequency assigned to a specific band or radio service. It might sound complicated, but it's not. A short word on communications security, counterintelligence, and memory mode. All the data you input into these radios are potentially exploitable. What that means, without mincing words, is that if captured, will absolutely be used against you. Every adversary on the potential battlefield should be considered an intelligence collector, formal training or not, and your radio is one of the most valuable targets carried. I highlighted this in my book for that specific reason when I'm talking to people. With that said, every Taliban member with a radio in Afghanistan became a target of interest for us, not just because of the presence of the radio, but the manner in which they were communicating. They were primarily using analog dual-band radios very similar to the Baofeng. Our practice for recovering a radio was to not turn it off and immediately hand it off to the signals intelligence collector we had assigned to the team, who'd then break down all the contents in the memory in an effort to map out the current communications plan. Do not, under any circumstance, program the memory of your radio you intend on using for tactical or clandestine purposes. These will be used against you when compromised, in addition to leading to complacency and practice among your group. I can tell you from experience that complacency does not just kill you, but it kills all of the ground gained by your movement. From a counterintelligence perspective, we want to give a potential adversary as little as possible, and at every opportunity make them believe we are in the position of weakness and inferior capability. I'll stress this massively. I think when you're making a group, teaching them how to run the VFO and punching in a number and getting that stuff done is more important than anything else, because if you program their radios, they will not know how to fix their problems later, and it will come back to bite you in the ass, especially if you channelize it up, something happens, you wipe the radio, now they're dead and they can't talk to you, and that might be a bigger situation than you want to deal with. Continuing page 22. For this reason, I strongly advise groups to input their operating frequencies in the frequency mode alone and do not bother with the memory at all. This is also in bold text in the book. If everything is a factory default, should the radio be captured, it will provide almost no value to the group that captured it. Same logic applies to only using license-free channelized data as well. It creates patterns, and the root of intelligence and analysis is pattern recognition. While programs like Chirp make streamlining communication planning seem easy, it also becomes a serious crutch leading to training scars in practice. In my experience, in addition to the exploitation of data, it also leads to team members not knowing how to troubleshoot their own equipment and usually inducing failures when trying to do so. The Baofeng is a simple piece of gear. Keep it that way. He has a image of the Baofeng front panel programming. You can look on it there. The screen is a simple LCD with a top and bottom frequency, a battery life indicator, and a small signal strength meter in the top corner. The other symbols are various indicators for menu functions enabled, such as Vox, power level, and repeater offsets. The arrows to the left of the frequency number indicator indicates which frequency you're operating on, top or bottom, unless it's blinking. This indicates the radio is receiving on a particular frequency. When in channel mode, the radio also has the option of displaying the name of the channel in alphanumeric letters. People frequently do this for naming the license-free frequencies, repeaters for amateur radio and GMRS operations, or particular frequencies in a dedicated communications plan. Like you just said in the book, don't fill this stuff out unless you're using this for sustainment. Honestly, thinking about doing this for the church, because we have old gentlemen who don't want to do it. And to be fair, they're working through learning basic survival stuff. It's a Signs of the Times group, really good dudes, but they have normal lives, and this isn't their main hobby, their secondary hobby, or their least favorite hobby. It's just another item that they have to deal with. So we might do something like that, and I've got to talk to one of the guys who specifically got in the GMRS program to see what he wants. Entering or changing a frequency. To get going in a hurry, keep the UV5R in frequency mode by hitting the VFO MR button. If the voice prompt is enabled in the menu, more on this later, it will tell you channel mode or frequency mode. From here, you can directly enter the frequency on which you are wanting to transmit or receive. Simply punch in the numbers and you're good to go. But with that said, it requires 6 digits, or it won't complete the action. For example, a frequency of 144.100 must be entered with all 6 digits to change. If you mess up, no worries, either press the exit button or just let it set for a couple seconds. It goes back to the old frequency and you can start this process over. I've done that multiple times. And honestly, I just wait and it usually resets. I always forget to use the exit button. If you are in channel mode, the digits you press correspond to the channel assignment in the memory list. Looking for channel 12, enter 12 on the keypad. Looking for channel 2, enter 02. That's simple. Hit the AB button number 12 in the diagram above to select between the top and bottom frequencies or channels. You know which one you are on by the black arrow out to the left of the numbers. Again, if you get hung up, just give the radio a second and it will return to the old operating frequency. It really is that simple, but I often have people who get frustrated when entering frequencies into the radio for the first time because they're overthinking the equipment. In my experience, it's not the radio that gets messed up, it's a lack of knowledge on the part of the operator. Lock the keypad. The radio operator must be able to troubleshoot his gear, especially at night. Further, he must also have the experience level to identify the vectors of issues before they arise. Just as with weapons training, we have to know what causes the malfunctions in an effort to prevent them before it costs us. In one small unit tactics course I was teaching some time back, the class was conducting a movement to contact, i.e. a patrol technique that is searching for an unknown enemy along a planned route. The movement was taking place at night. Like all patrols, as we pointed out in Chapter 1, they were split into 2 groups of roughly 10 guerrillas each, an assault element and a support by fire. Having several well-seasoned combat vets from the Army and the U.S. Marine Corps in the class, their movement was predictably picture-perfect. Quiet, precise, and aware. They moved like stone-cold killers, and I was proud to observe it. Patrol leader's radio then emitted a sound, a short beep, just loud enough for me to hear. Despite his experience level as a recently retired infantry platoon sergeant, with these type of patrols being almost reflexive from his 20 years of doing it, he was wholly unfamiliar with the UV5R. He didn't lock the control panel before movement, and it shifted to frequencies when bounced around on his gear during movement. It happens. With comms now lost at night, the 2 elements of the patrol began to increase distance between one another. Anything beyond 100 meters in poor visibility or at night is a serious liability. He called a halt and was visibly frustrated at losing command and control. Having even more of a spread between the groups, he attempted to walk to the trailing support by fire group, and predictably, they shot him, thinking he was the enemy. Welcome to reality of nighttime patrolling. I stress this every time we have these conversations. Go to his freaking class. Go experience this stuff. Everything from dropping little chem sticks as a back trail thing and how that can affect you to just wear your gear. There was a guy on X recently going by the moniker Father Abraham. It's at Father ABR. He also has a really good podcast, and I really think you should go over and check out his podcast as well. Check him out if you're bored, you got more podcasts you want to listen to. Highly recommend him. Good Christian dude. That said, he goes out with his son, he goes hikes with his gear, he tries his stuff out. It's out in Montana. That's a lot easier for him to do it than some of the urban guys. But that doesn't mean you can't spend a little time in your house with your gear on, just moving around, going other places and doing things. I know Scout absolutely hates airsoft. I understand. I agree with his point. It can set up the same thing he says in this book about training scars. That said, you can wear your gear and try it out. All right, continuing on page 25. Now, this was in training and he was shot with blanks, but the lesson learned were very much real. In training, you will die a lot. Without communications, you will die a lot. And one of the skills that needs to be hammered home is the ability to program and troubleshoot your equipment on the fly. Expect no one to be able to do it for you in an unsupported operational environment, be it mostly benign rule retreat in the first scenario or a nighttime ambush or anything in between. You have to have the working knowledge for every in and out of the radio itself, just as you would your weapon system or any other piece of equipment you're carrying, because your life depends on it. What I always advocate doing, and might be a great habit to get into, is locking the keypad after each change I make. Just as in the example I shared, your radio absolutely will change frequency on you while you're moving. This is really regardless of radio. Once, when I was a newly minted infantry fire team leader, we were experimenting with E.F. Johnson's public safety UHF radios for inter-team use. We did an air assault insertion on a training exercise, and I didn't have comms with anyone. Those E.F. Johnsons did not have a front panel, but just a knob for changing the pre-programmed channels, and mine was off a couple channels. My M4 hitting it when I was exiting the Blackhawk. Things happen, mistakes are made, and lessons are learned. I learned a lesson, and like my patrol leader in the previous example, I learned to lock down all the functions of my radio before movement. On a Baofeng, we do this by holding down the pound key, which will give you a voice prompt saying lock, if enabled, and there will be a similar key icon that appears beside the battery indicator. Now you'll notice that all the keypad functions have been disabled aside from the push to talk. To disable the lock, hold down the pound key again until it unlocks and the icon will disappear. Also, for you younger generation, the pound key is also called a hashtag, which I almost forgot. It is important to note that the lock function does not control volume. It can still get knocked off. Another student and friend of mine who's an active duty Marine Corps NCO in an ANGLICO unit. I do not know how to say that acronym, which are high-speed Marines responsible for calling in artillery and air munitions, was in my scout course leading another night patrol. They lost comms, but this time the culprit wasn't an unlocked screen, but the volume knob getting cut all the way down without him knowing. He learned a valuable lesson about the gear that night, and so did everyone else. I will also add to this, Vigilante Engineering has a knob protector. Several places also build knob protectors for the radios. I think he's specifically for the AR-152. I have one. I absolutely love it. Baofengs are known for those knobs being moved around, and that can be a pain in the ass. So be prepared for that. One of the side things you can do if you're not going to be messing with your volume control that much, put a piece of electrical tape over it and keep it relatively pinned in place. And that helps a whole bunch. We're going to stop there, page 26. We'll be continuing on from there, but I'm going to edit this up and make sure you guys have a little short podcast. I will be doing more with Joe Dolio's books. Last, I'd like to say historian's class is coming up. He's got his Missouri class. So if you guys are beyond the Baofeng and you're in the HF region, highly recommend his class. He will teach you how to hide with NVIS communications, and he will teach you more about radios than just about anyone I've met. As anybody knows, Scout knows his radios very well. This guy is a master class in it. I have not met Wyoming Survival. I know teaches a similar class, and I would say it's very comparable. I think this guy, being that his background is he keeps it close to the chest, unless you come to the class, I'm not going to spill all stuff. This guy knows a little bit more because of his past history, but Wyoming Survival, if you watch any of his videos, both of them are one for one, know what they're talking about on NVIS stuff. And NVIS is so important on how not to get tracked down by your common ham FUD and even your government. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed that. We're a little bit further in. I'm going to finish off this book sooner or later. Thanks. Bye.